Numbers chapter 30. And Moses spake unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. If a man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth. If a woman also vow a vow unto the Lord, and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hear her vow and her bond wherewith she said she hath bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in the day that he heareth, not any of her vows or any of her bonds wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand, and the Lord shall forgive her, because her father disallowed her. And if she had at all an husband when she vowed, or uttered aught out of her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, and her husband heard it, and held his peace at her in the day that he heard it, then her vows shall stand, and her bonds wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. And if her husband disallowed her on the day that he heard it, then he shall make her vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered from her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, of none effect, and the Lord shall forgive her. But every vow of a widow, and of her that is divorced, wherewith they have bound their soul, shall stand against her. And if she vowed in her husband's house, or bound her soul by a bond with an oath, and her husband heard it, and held his peace at her, and disallowed her not, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. And if her husband hath utterly made them void on the day he heard them, then whatsoever proceedeth out of her lips concerning her vows, or concerning the bond of her soul, shall not stand. Her husband hath made them void, and the Lord shall forgive her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict the soul, her husband may establish it, or her husband may make it void. But if her husband altogether hold his peace at her from day to day, then he establish all her vows, or all her bonds, which are upon her. He confirmeth them, because he held his peace at her in the day that he heard them. But if he shall anyways make them void after that he hath heard them, then he shall bear her iniquity. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between the father and his daughter, being yet in her youth in her father's house. Here Moses is outlining the laws of oaths and vows as they apply to men and women. And there are appear to be two totally different laws, but they're actually exactly the same. They depend on the fulfillment on the circumstances of the individuals. Basically, because men were in total charge and total responsibility. For instance, if something happened in the family, the father was the one who was totally responsible for straightening it out. He had the authority, he had the total responsibility for straightening it out. And so no matter what it was up to him to handle it. And so he had total responsibility for that. The law was that if a husband, man, basically independent, looking after himself, made a vow, made an oath, he would do exactly what he vowed to do. It was assumed to have a brain, be able to think about it, and honor the promises that he made to God. Now, the vast majority of these vows that were made and oaths that we're talking about here would have been to do with religious service. So they would have been vows, perhaps, or oaths of being a Nazirite or something like that, being consecrated, being set apart, saying a certain number of prayers every day, going and being outside the tabernacle of the congregation, providing water, and cleaning up, helping other people. Could have been anything. So for men, you make it, you do it. For women, a different set of standards applies. Because the husband and father are responsible for the women in their household, they have a responsibility to either approve or disapprove of the vow. And in the case of the father, if he has a daughter and he hears her make a vow, he can disallow it. But if he does, he is responsible if she's done something and she's trying to straighten out what she's done. He's responsible for her sin. He's taken it upon himself. Heavenly Father will forgive her because she can't do it because her father said no. If a divorcee or a widow makes a vow because she's not dependent on any man, she's expected to carry the responsibility for doing that exactly the same as a man. If a woman who makes a vow and then marries, the first her husband hears about it, it is his responsibility to either keep quiet, in which case that establishes that the vow is going to continue, or to disallow the vow or oath, in which case he then takes upon himself any sin that might apply. And if he doesn't disallow it, then it's entitled to, it can be carried on. It's a very, very simple, straightforward thing, but these people it was very common in those days for people to make oaths, and some of these things were not brilliant. Some of these oaths were really very poorly thought out. I remember reading about one in the Old Testament, I think it was the Old Testament, where a father was so joyous about something happening that he vowed a vow to sacrifice whatever came out of his camp first, assuming that it would be a sheep or a goat or something or other. Turned out to be his daughter. And he was expected to carry on with that. We'll get to that point, and you'll see what happened as a result of this and how the daughter handled the news when her father told her what he had vowed. They took these things, these vows, deadly serious in those days. Sometimes it was nice for us to make vows and well thought out vows. And I will do this and stick to it.